Welcome, friends. This is Mike Williams. The following interview was a show I did back in September of 2018 with Anita Whitney, and although 2 years has passed, the discussion is still very pertinent to today's events. Thanks for listening.
I'd like to start, however, with a real live situation in my world that came up over the last 2 weeks, and then we're going to bring Mike in. He knows a bit about it, but we're going to share what is going on and help listeners perhaps understand how this game is being played. Okay, I have a close relative, who is now 17. When she was 7, she was at the babysitter's house, and a man in a mask with a gun came through the door. I don't know that the door was even locked. They felt they lived in a safe neighborhood. He came through the door to rob the house. It was right before Christmas. He scared the children hugely. They were mortified. He told them they had to sit at the table with their hands on the table and not to move an inch. And he proceeded to remove all the Christmas gifts and other things in the house, and then he left. Well, that left a huge impression on her, being only 7. And as time goes by, people will notice all these shootings, right? School shootings. Every time there's a shooting, they spent a whole lot of time in the media exposing what has happened and how the people were injured, and they interview all the people who are super upset. They even have, in my family member's school, they have shooter drills. So all of this kind of compounded on this young woman and the 17-year-old to the point where she is basically mortified. She can't sleep at night. We try to reassure this person that there's dogs in the house and the family, and really nothing's going to happen. And in her mind, she goes right back to, well, anybody who wants to break in can shoot the dogs. They could shoot you. It ends up that she's just mortified. She's not eating well. She's not sleeping well. She's hypervigilant, and she claims that she is having suicidal thoughts. So the family members all got together, and we want to help her. Of course we want to help her. So we're trying to figure out the best way. And if you've listened to this show at all, you will know that any discussion of drug therapy for this relative, I would frown on quite firmly, and I was against that. So we were seeking other ways of helping her, and we all thought about hypnotherapy. We thought, well, maybe this is how we can help her get past this trauma. So I put in a call to Mike Williams, and we had a fabulous conversation. And I'm going to share Mike Williams with you, and you can learn from what he has to say as well. Welcome, Mike. You really helped me that day I talked to you.
Well, I'm glad I helped you, Al, and thank you very much for having me back on the show.
I'm thrilled to have you. So maybe you can share with the listeners what happens when a child has a traumatic event and it's not, I don't know, it's just sort of ignored maybe, and as the years go by, what happens?
The brain is, think of it as like a hard drive on a computer. So what happens is when events happen in our lives, files get written to that hard drive. So in the case of your family friend, back when she was 7 years old, a very traumatic event took place, and it was very fear-based. So let's just keep that in mind, because a lot of what goes on today in order to keep people in a state of fear and duress is to ensure that there's fear. So in her case, it happened when a person came in with a gun and files got written to her hard drive. So now what happens is, as she progresses through her life, those files will continue to play themselves. Whenever she encounters a situation or a circumstance that the mind believes is related to those files. It doesn't have to be an exact match. It just has to be close enough. So in her case, as she's getting older, and now we have these active shooter drills, or we have the actual quote-unquote active shooters at the various schools and in other places, events around the world. What happens is this brings that file back into play. So she's going to react and she's going to behave the way she reacted and behaved back when she was 7 years old when the person came in and robbed the house at gunpoint. And that reaction and that behavior is going to be fear. And it's going to result in worry, and it's going to result in a lot of anxiety and concern. So the only way to be able to get your family friend feeling better is to go into that hard drive, to locate those files, and essentially reframe them. And when we say reframe, it means to understand the event back then, to go through a process of desensitizing. And part of that desensitizing process, Al, is very simply having the client, in this case, your family friend, aware that even though it was scary at the time, very scary, nothing happened. She's okay. But the mind itself doesn't take that extra step. It just recognizes that initial event of fear and being very scared, and that's what she's taking forth. But if we can get the mind to understand that, yes, even though it was a scary moment, you're okay.
Well, she even sits they told me she goes to school and she sits in the cafeteria, and when she sees someone opening their purse to get something out,
right,
she thinks maybe it could be a gun. And this helplessness plays into this, doesn't it, Mike? Because even though she's at a school that has police guards, they don't allow guns, it doesn't seem to register in her head. She feels helpless.
Right. She doesn't feel safe and she feels helpless. And the point you just made, Al, where somebody's reaching into their bag and she's thinking it could possibly be a gun. Remember what I said with these files. If the situation or circumstance is interpreted by the mind as being close enough,
yeah,
the behavior will follow. And that's what's happened. So, or that's what's happening to her. And of course, the news is just filled with this stuff.
It's unreal.
Right. On and on and on. And this is all fear-based programming. That's what this is. And it's to keep people in a fearful place and to have them worry and to be concerned. And so when you're in that mindset, when you're reacting that way, you are in survival mode. You're trying to survive. You're not thriving. And by keeping people in that mode, you're keeping them down. You're keeping them from really optimizing their potential. You're keeping them from being able to move forward in life. Essentially, what you're doing is you're lowering the consciousness of the populace because people who follow this stuff and people who believe all of this stuff are going to be very concerned about their life and their safety. What they do is they go to the very, very base mechanism that we have, which is to protect ourselves and to be safe. And so when they have all of these shootings and these types of events, that's what happens. People get very, very worried and concerned, and they're always looking over their shoulder. They're not looking forward to enjoying their life and achieving goals in their life. They're going to have a lot of struggles because they're going to be paralyzed by what's going on, and they're going to translate that into their life.
Well, and they become essentially disabled.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, you just look at her and she doesn't want to go places. You know, they turn into, in her case and maybe in others, they sort of turn into agoraphobics, because if you go somewhere, you could run into a mall where there's a shooting, or you could run into, anywhere.
Right.
And so she only feels safe if she's like locked up. And this is, obviously at 17, my gosh, she might as well be in jail if she can't get past this, because all of the opportunities of the world and all of the things that she could enjoy and get pleasure from, she's blocking them. She's not getting pleasure, basically, Mike.
Right, because she has been told through all of these events that the world outside is extremely unsafe. It's a fearful place, and so don't make your way outside, or don't go places where you normally would go. Are told about these shootings at schools and at malls and at events and the Boston Marathon. So they're putting it out to many, many areas of our life where we would normally go and not be concerned and have a good time. So they're really trying to keep people boxed in. Now, your family member is an extreme case, obviously. There are people who watch the news and they follow this stuff and they're wringing their hands, but they're not as paralyzed by it, is probably the best way to say it, as your family member. But still, it weighs on a lot of people because, in my life, I have family members and friends, and, they talk about this stuff, and they're very worried about, where the world is going and how society is very violent and so on. And, I don't know how much you want to get into this, but, I can make a case that society really isn't that violent. A lot of the violence is brought about by people who have an agenda.
Right. Go ahead. Get into it, because that's part of the reason I wanted you on, is you see that, and I see it. There is an agenda going on, and there's more than one reason for it, correct? Yeah,
there's an agenda, and the agenda is essentially, first and foremost, it's control. So they're able to control the populace by keeping people in a fear-based mode. So if you're fearful, then you're going to reach out to authorities to keep you safe, to ensure that you have your quote-unquote, your freedom. Or, as they'll tell you, you have to give up some freedom in order to be safe, right? So we have that aspect of it also. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get people to hunker down and keep them in survival mode, not to thrive in their lives. So many folks in the population are buying into this because it is played over and over and over again on the media, on television, on the quote-unquote news, which is not really news. It's it's propaganda.
Yes.
And it's programming. That's why when you watch television shows, they call it programming. They're programming you. That's the agenda overall, is to maintain control. You can't control people if people are enlightened. If people are free thinking and critically thinking, Al, it's very difficult to corral those folks.
And Mike, I've been talking on this program since it started like 4 years ago about how it is we are unwittingly giving our consent for so much of this. But stay tuned. We're going to go to a short break. We will be back soon.
I don't know how much you want to get into these shootings because
I do. I have not covered that at all on this show.
Okay.
And it seems like a good time to do it, because talking about how we deal with that, you and I talked about that, so we might as well talk about it. Do we tell them the truth? How will they handle that? I mean, to me, that's important for us all to start thinking about.
Well, they're engineered, so.
No, they are.
Yeah, we could talk about that.
When your family's afraid, is that the time to tell them they're engineered? I mean, that's a hard question that I hope smart people are thinking about.
Yeah, the problem is most people have no idea they're engineered because they believe that the authorities are telling them the truth. Why would the authorities lie to us?
Yeah.
Why would they do this? And we can get into the fact that they're capstone events, and which means that they're getting tons of federal funding to put these events in place and pull them off.
Yeah, we can, and I want to do that because it's more, the money involved is significant.
Yes.
And the sales of cameras and the sales of SWAT team equipment, all of this is significant.
And also, I mean, what's the next step to this thing? These things keep happening, so we're seeing it. It's happening. The militarization of the police.
Right, exactly. We end up with a police state, and we're getting there. We're already there in many places.
Yeah. Yep.
So we might as well go for it, huh?
Yeah, let's go for it. And, if people don't like it, I guess they'll stop listening. It's just one of those topics where some people just say they can't listen to it because it really shakes their world.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't help, especially if I'm trying to get them not to consent.
Yeah.
And they're under the piano.
Yeah.
Hiding.
Yeah.
Talking about how I have been encouraging everyone not to consent to this and how much of what we're doing we're volunteering into. And we feel we don't have an option. And I think Mike has just described, when everybody's afraid, one of the reasons it's difficult for me to make any progress in getting people to stand up, use legal notices, restrict their signatures, and start saying, no, I'm not going to consent to this, is that they're all afraid. And I get that. They send me emails. They're all afraid. Now, it doesn't help when in my town, like the annual state fair takes place in Central Ohio, they've got policemen walking all over, heavily armed policemen. You go to the emergency department, you have to go through a checkpoint with a guy with a gun sitting right behind the desk. And there are cameras everywhere. SWAT teams are popping up everywhere. So when I'm trying to convince people to stand up for themselves, and even in paperwork, we're just talking about paperwork, Mike, they don't seem to want to do it. It seems like these events and this militarization of the police force has really had its impact on people being afraid to even say no.
No, that's true, Al. And, it goes back to go back in history a little bit, back into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we had Gladio, which has now come out in Europe, where NATO was behind these engineered and orchestrated terror events that took place back a few decades ago. So for people to think that the government or organizations or entities within the government wouldn't participate or engineer and orchestrate these types of events, well, it's already been proven that they do. So it's a matter of people going back and doing some homework and just going back in time a little bit, not that far into history, and seeing that these things indeed do get done. And the reason why they get done is because it moves agendas forward. It's kind of a difficult topic to touch on because people don't want to believe that people who are in positions of authority, the government, the police, and so on, especially the government, that they would lie to us, or that they wouldn't tell us the truth, or that they would deceive us.
Or they would harm us intentionally.
Or that they would harm us intentionally. That's exactly right. So what happens is when these events roll out, like these school shootings as an example, people, the first thing they do is, well, like I said before, they want to be safe, they want to be secure, and so they look to authority. They look to the government to protect them, when in fact, these events are orchestrated. They are engineered.
And they use crisis actors.
Yes. So they will utilize, and they do utilize, crisis actors. There are companies that this is what they do.
Yeah.
They employ people to be crisis actors in these events. Now, again, I know this is very, very difficult for people to get their heads wrapped around. You're going to see patterns. That's the thing. There are patterns. They all roll out the same way, the exact same way.
When I was suspicious when a lot of researchers started seeing problems with the Boston shooting. And the points they were making were very, very valid. So you see a staged event. Now, we had a staged event right here in Central Ohio. That was, to me, okay, this is what's really going on. I discovered that there was money coming in to these different counties, to the county sheriffs and possibly the cities, from the federal government for SWAT equipment.
Right.
Okay. But it cost money, and there were, in these grants where they were providing this SWAT equipment, there were terms and conditions. We talk about that relentlessly on this show. It's all a corporate structure. Grants are contracts. When they accept a grant, there's terms and conditions, okay? And if they don't meet those terms and conditions, they have to give the money back. People just kind of don't understand that's what's really going on with the government today. Money is pouring in the terms of grants, terms and conditions. The locals accept the money, and then they're obligated to perform.
Right.
Well, this was a grandmother in a small town north of here, and I don't know if I could even find it anymore. It's been several years. A grandmother and her granddaughter were standing outside the end of the driveway of a farmer's house, his farm. They disapproved of the way he was treating his cows. So they had signs, and I can't even remember what the sign said, trying to call attention to this farmer doing these bad things to his cows. Well, you probably are aware that they've tried to make PETA members of violent terrorism, which they are not. But anyway, the county saw this as an opportunity because part of the grant conditions were they have so many drills. They have to have drills. And so the local sheriff used that as an opportunity to have a drill. And this poor grandmother and her granddaughter, there were like 8 police cars and 4 helicopters that descended on these 2 women.
Right.
Scared the bejesus out of them. But the point of it wasn't that they were a threat. It was meeting the conditions of the terms, and they had to have a drill. We have another city south of Columbus who claimed that it was costing them $70,000 a year to maintain their SWAT team, and so they just voted to get rid of it because it was too expensive. So that means that they couldn't afford to keep having these drills, and they said no more. So people don't really get that there's grants in place requiring that these drills occur.
No, they're called capstone events, and I've covered this on some shows with Sophia Smallstorm and a couple of other guests. And a capstone event basically is it's a drill where federal funding flows into these communities. It is organized and put together by FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. They do these events. They do them as if they're actually real events. There are a lot of people that participate in them, and they are not aware that they are drills. We have to make that perfectly clear. So I'm not saying that everybody that is involved in these events is well aware that it is a drill. But those that are at the top of the pyramid of putting this together, they are aware of this. And the public is not knowing because it's played up in the media as a real event. And this is what perpetuates what goes into everybody's living room. And this is why people become fearful. And because it is, like I said, it's trauma programming. It's to keep you in fear.
Right.
So, I also don't want to say, because a lot of people who are in the truth community and the alternative research community will say that nobody died at these events. And I'm not one of those people that takes that position. And the reason why I don't, Al, is because I wasn't there. I don't know. In many of these events, it's highly questionable whether anybody died, but we really don't know. And one of the examples that I use where government takes lives is they'll send your kids off to war, and they won't think twice about that.
Right.
So just think about that, folks. So for anybody out there who's in the truth community that's saying nobody has died at these events, just think in terms of that people do die. It was probably the Oklahoma City bombing back in, 93 or 94, that really kicked things off. But it was 9/11, that false flag, that was the mother lode.
There's no question, Mike.
Yeah.
Every time I look to see when policies got started, including in my county, I went to their website and I looked at why they had developed this new form of justice system, which was a collaboration, and they were changing the way the courts were running. And when I read through the information, lo and behold, the reason they did it is because of 9/11.
Yeah.
When I looked at why they passed the Real ID Act, and I looked at the legislation that came out of Washington, and I read it. It's boring, but it's enlightening. And the justification for the Real ID Act was 9/11.
Yes. Well, the entire surveillance state we have today is based upon 9/11.
Yes.
Right, with the FISA courts and so on. And again, there were many, many people that today still believe the official story as to how 9/11 went down, when in fact, it's been 17 years now. And in that 17 years, there has been a tremendous amount of work done by folks who have researched 9/11 in the alternative media and alternative researchers. And if you take in or you follow any of that stuff and read any of that stuff or watch it, you're going to see that the official story is it's filled with holes. It's filled with holes, and it didn't go down the way they're telling you. And that's why, Al, just to go through this quickly, they have to re-traumatize everybody every year with 9/11. That's why every year there's the 9/11 memorials, and they have these somber moments, and they're lighting candles, and they're going to ground zero, which, by the way, is a term used for when they talk about nuclear explosions. They talk about ground zero. So they use a very odd term to describe the 9/11 where the buildings were, calling it ground zero, right?
Yes.
So in any case, so every year they have to basically reprogram everybody to get them to remember that moment, to remember that time. they'll play the loops with the planes and the buildings and all that stuff. And, it's basically to keep the conditioning in place. But, I think a lot of people, or more and more people, are starting to break the conditioning from 9/11, and they're starting to see things in a different light. So with that, they can't rely on that forevermore. People will tend to not pay attention to it. In fact, a lot of young people probably don't focus on 9/11 at all. So what they've got to do is they've got to introduce new events.
Yeah.
So instead of having a big thing like 9/11, now what we're seeing is, we're seeing shootings out in Paris and shootings here in the United States and all kinds of, bombings and shootings out in other places in Europe. So what they've done is they've taken their theater, it's worldwide now, to ensure that the entire world is caught up in this. It's really quite unbelievable, actually, the way it's been all put together.
Yes, and you can hear people talking in the EU Parliament and using war on terror. The term war on terror is used almost in every government across the planet now.
Right.
The other buzzword that I see, even on some of my favorite shows that are not at all about violence, I believe that the real life events, like in some of these shows, these homestead shows in Alaska. Okay, these are real people. Granted, I don't know, sometimes they do things that I kind of wonder about, but nevertheless, reality TV, it appears to me they are being scripted also and told to get the word safe in there. I mean, the word safe, I swear it's used 100 times every day if I turn on that TV.
Oh, yeah. They're using hypnosis, Al, on television. This is what they're doing. And if you want me to explain it,
please,
I'll explain how it's done. Okay, so a lot of people, they sit in front of the television set, and we'll just use the cable news networks. I mean, but it applies to any other program. That's why they call it a program running on television. So whenever one of these events takes place, whether it's a shooting or a bombing, whatever, the first thing they do is they play a loop, a tape loop. And they play it over and over and over again. The reason why they do that is because your subconscious mind loves imagery. That's how the subconscious mind takes in things. That's how it learns imagery. Then, along with the imagery, what they'll do is, along the bottom of the screen, they will flash up the words alert, terror, bombing, shooting. These are suggestions. These are direct suggestions that are being implanted into the mind of the person that's watching the television set. And when you watch television, and you watch it long enough, and it doesn't take very long for this to happen, you drop into a trance state. You drop from beta, which is your waking state, into alpha. Alpha is a light trance state, and most people, when they're sitting in front of the television set, will drop right into alpha. And just think about this now. Now you're in a trance state. And what they're doing is they're playing this loop over and over again. So now you're in trance and you're watching this loop. It's like the airplanes on 9/11. Then they're flashing up the words, terror, alert, shooting, bombing. And then you've got the talking head comes on. This is the hypnotist that comes on and starts talking more. I mean, instead of just getting written suggestions, you're now getting verbal suggestions, just like you would if you went to a hypnotist and you sat in a chair. And to ensure that the trance state is established, whenever you watch these cable news networks, let's pick on Fox. We're just picking on them. It could be CNN, MSNBC, any of them. Lower left-hand part of the screen, you see a Fox News logo that is turning very slowly. This is what's called eye fixation. This is what's used in hypnosis in order for the eye to fixate on that turning little box or logo at the bottom of the screen, and it puts you into a trance state. It's also why at the bottom of the screen, they will often run a ticker tape, which will either have stock prices or it'll have news that's going on. Well, that ticker tape that's going along the bottom of the screen is not there so that you can see and pick up your stock prices. The eye focuses on the movement of that ticker tape. And by focusing on it, you're going to go into a trance state. Again, it's eye fixation. So, if we recap, they're using all kinds of hypnotic tricks with the ticker tape, the moving logo. This is eye fixation. You're dropping into an alpha state. Now that you're in a trance state, you are watching a screen and they're playing a video loop, the imagery. Then they're going to flash up written suggestions, terror, bombing, shooting, and then the talking head comes on and then gives you the verbal suggestions. This is what's going on. This is why they want you in front of your television set as much as they can get you in front of it. That's why news, remember, Al, when we were younger, news used to be at 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock. That was it.
Right.
Right? Now you have 24/7.
Right.
24/7 news cycles, and there's a reason why they did that. It was to make sure that they kept the programming, the hypnosis box, going, a perpetual motion machine, to ensure that they capture as much of the population as they possibly can to get them conditioned to believe the story that's being presented to them.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I've seen it actually in my own family members. It doesn't happen with me because for the most part, I walk through the room with the TV on. I do walkthroughs. And for the most part, I don't believe anything that comes out of that box. So my effort is to try not to yell and scream at the TV, But I've seen other family members looking at the TV and I can be speaking to them and it's like they don't even hear me.
No, they're in a trance. They're zoned out.
Yes.
They're so connected to what's going on. That's because they're in a trance state. It's the same thing, Al, when, let's just say you go to a movie theater. It's a very popular movie, and there's 500 seats in the movie theater. When you first get there and you sit down, you take a seat before the movie starts, you're well aware that you are one of 500 people. But as soon as the movie starts to play, your focus and your awareness is on that screen. And when that happens, you dip into an alpha state, trance state. And the other 499 people in the theater, they're excluded from your awareness. You're not concerned about them being there. It's like they don't exist because you're so focused on what's playing on the screen. That's a trance state. That's the same thing that happens when your family members or your friends are watching TV and they're just connected into what's going on. You can walk by, you can talk to your spouse or your partner or your kids, and they don't hear you. They don't hear you, and that's because they're in a trance state.
And that means they're taking all that garbage in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, my gosh. No wonder we have arguments,
Well, this is why I tell folks, they say, well, Mike, what do you suggest is one of the first things to do to start the process of awakening? I said, turn the television off.
Yeah. Turn
your TV off. Shut that thing down, and you will start to awaken.
You know what did it for me? I think, and you can tell me what you think, that this is also, you can still watch TV, but you will see what they're doing. When I saw that wonderful documentary called Psy Wars by Scott Noble, he put together a great documentary talking about the fact that we are being propagandized 24/7.
Yes.
And his argument and his presentation was excellent. And in the beginning of it, he had someone who was an expert in journalism explaining that when it comes to propaganda, and the people in this country feel like they're very sophisticated. They think they're very sophisticated, critical thinkers, and couldn't happen to them.
Right.
But the point was, if you are a fish in a fish tank, the last thing you're going to see is the water.
That's right. That's right, because you're in that fish tank and you think that's your world.
Exactly. And that just like, it broke me out of that trance, I think, forever. Because then I look at that box and I look at it, what kind of garbage are they trying to sell me now?
Well, once you pick up on it, once you know it and you listen to it, you actually get a chuckle out of it because you know exactly what they're doing. You know exactly where they're going. That's the thing, Now, I just want to mention one more thing about another technique that is always, always there when you're watching television, especially the news networks. They use the colors blue and red. So you'll watch Fox News or CNN. It's always blue and red. So the set is blue and red, or two people will be on debating each other. One is decked out, let's say, in a suit and a blue tie, and another one is there in a suit and a red tie, or there's a lady in a red dress and another lady in a blue dress. Well, the reason why they do that is because the mind reacts to those colors. So when the mind sees blue, it's relaxation, it's calmness, it's generosity. When it sees red, it means alert, stop, beware. So what they do is they play the blue and red off of each other. As an example, one of the things that they do, this is a very popular technique, is if they want their viewership to listen to a particular message, in other words, they want to get a point across and they want people to get comfortable with it, the person speaking to them and the set will be decked out in blue.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Because the blue is saying, I am a voice of reason. Relax, calm down, it's okay. I'll explain everything, you'll understand it, everything's going to be all right. When they want you to be concerned or worried, in other words, they want to stir the pot and get the fear up and running, you're going to see more red. So somebody will come on with a red tie, and they'll talk about how terrible this event was and how we need to have better security and better surveillance. And so they'll wear a red tie, or the lady will wear a red dress. This is very, very common. So folks, if you're listening to this, when you watch Fox News or you watch CNN, take a look at all of the blue and red on the set and take a look at the clothing of the people that are presenting to you.
Well, the programming is so hideous. I mean, it's so violent. It's so lewd that when I'm watching TV, and I usually kind of watch for a while at the end of the day, I have to find program that has none of the above, which isn't easy.
Yeah.
That is not easy. And I knew things were going badly for the American people when the only program I found that I could watch was the Weather Channel.
Well, and even that's propaganda, by the way.
Of course it is, and absolutely. And even that is propaganda. But they had a series of tow trucks, these guys in Canada whose job it was to pull these great big semis out from snowbanks in a snowstorm, and you watch how they use the equipment, and I found that interesting. But at the same time, what you said is very true. On the bottom of the screen,
right,
they're rolling this weather ticker tape across the bottom all the time.
That's right. That's to get you into a trance state. And when you watch ball games, as an example, they'll have a circle that will go around, they'll spin, and then inside that circle there will be numbers that count down to the big game at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's hypnosis. What they're doing is they're stepping you down, counting you down as you're watching that, they call it a mnemonic, going around in a circle. That's the eye fixation. It's putting you in trance, and now they're going to count you down from 5 to 1. And you're going to sit in front of your television set, you're going to watch your ball games, you're going to drink your beer, and you're going to eat your Cheetos, and that's where you're going to stay. You're going to stay distracted. It's like the bread and circuses. So it's in everything. It's whenever you're watching television, television is a hypnosis box. Make no mistake about it. That's why they call these shows programs. You watch the news, the person's referred to as an anchor, a news anchor. In hypnosis, we anchor. So when we have a suggestion, a good suggestion as an example, you go to a good hypnotherapist. After the mind becomes aware of a reframe or a more positive direction, we have certain techniques to anchor that suggestion, to make sure that the mind understands that going forward, this is the new behavior. This is the new way that we're going to react.
Well, I called Jim Fetzer, who wrote that book, and I know you know who he is. And
yeah.
I have been on his show. I haven't had the opportunity to have him on mine. But I asked him, I said, it seems like they're working overtime to protect the same book story when we got all these other stories,
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, I look at the battle they're fighting over the same book story. The people, they got Alex Jones involved. They got Professor James Tracy involved. They are really battling. Really, they're digging in when it comes to the same And I asked him, when all of these other things are going on, why is Sandy Hook so sacred? Now, his opinion is if Sandy Hook falls, they all fall.
I think he's right. And Sandy Hook was really the first big school shooting.
Yeah.
So if you knock the rungs out from underneath Sandy Hook, then what happens is every other school shooting and any other shooting, whether it was a school or not, we could talk about Vegas and San Bernardino, that's all going to crumble. People are going to start asking questions. So they have to protect that one. They have to put everything they have behind it. And it's interesting because Sandy Hook has been the most scrutinized by those who are doing the research to uncover what truly went on there, what really happened. I'm finding, and even myself, to be honest with you, Al, as more and more of these things roll out, my interest in focusing on them is waning. Now, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And the reason why it's waning, I guess for me, is because it's not that, I'm not interested. It's just that I know what's going on. So I don't have to spend a lot of time rehashing what I already know, But I think it's also the general public becomes desensitized to these as well.
That's what I was going to ask you next, because I look at my other members of my family, and they're not really involved. In fact, I would almost wage that they are sick of watching these things. They're tired of it, because when they cover them ad nauseum.
Yeah.
And so there's a percentage of the population will say, okay, I got it, and they'll just turn it off. They will not spend hours in front of the TV like so many people did on 9/11. People spent days in front of the TV.
I do believe the apathy is something that they rely on, though, because, with the apathy or people not paying as much attention to it, myself included, that the wheels behind the curtain continue to turn. And then they're able to put their agenda forward because there's less resistance, right? Because people really aren't asking any questions. The other thing, too, is that I believe that certain people who are involved in these events from a crisis actor perspective are rewarded. So as an example, we had that guy who was remember the young lady news reporter, I think it was in Virginia, that was allegedly shot at point blank range. And then her boyfriend came out and, they were together for like a couple of months and he's coming out with a book of their memories and all this stuff. Well, he wound up, I forgot the guy's name, but getting an anchor position, I believe, on that newscast. And also he won a seat in, I think it's Virginia. I hope I'm right with this thing, as a congressperson. So he was able to parlay that whole event into a position of influence, into a political position. So what does that mean? That means that they're putting their players in place, you see? And the public, because they're buying off on these things and they believe these things, are actually voluntarily electing and putting these characters into positions where they're going to shape policy. And they're going to change, they're going to change the country and the world in a way that is, I think most people are not going to be very happy about. I'm going to make a prediction that kid from down in Florida, David Hogg, I wouldn't be surprised within the next couple of years, we see he pops up someplace where he's going to be running for political office.
Well, and the more events they have, that's another thing. And talking to family members and people who aren't that enlightened about this, if you expose Sandy Hook and you can somehow convince them Sandy Hook was a drill and nobody died, so many of them would respond by saying, well, I suppose you would say these other ones were drills too. Yeah, right. In other words, the more they have, the more incredible it is to the general public to think that they were all staged. So they will just shut you down and discount everything you have to say.
Who trains these news people?
It is a hierarchy. Is this Ken?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens is many of them are just paid to read the monitors, right? So the training is just basically just reading they're essentially actors.
Is it the producer of the show who's kind of running the whole psyop?
I would say the producer is probably low level. I mean, you're getting into the actual executives running the station or the network.
Right.
And then above that also. So there is a hierarchy.
Compartmentalized to a certain extent.
It's compartmentalized completely.
Yeah.
And in some of the bigger names, like as an example, Sean Hannity is completely trained in neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I have a whole video where an NLP expert broke down Sean Hannity.
Yeah.
Using actual clips from Hannity's show.
Yeah.
And pinpointing exactly when he's using NLP techniques, and that is obviously to influence the audience,
right,
from a psychological perspective. But it's extremely compartmentalized.
Yeah.
People don't understand the magnitude of the compartmentalization. They do not understand it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. Here we go.
No problem.
Welcome back to the second hour of In Defense of Humanity. This is Al Whitney. My guest tonight is Mike Williams. He has had wonderful information that everyone should appreciate. Mike is a hypnotherapist and a musician. The last time he was on the show, we talked about what he knows about what's happened to pop music. It was great. But tonight we're talking about hypnosis and how it is being used. It's a tool to help people. And I would like to talk a little bit about how it helps people when you're doing therapy and you're an honest therapist and your goal is to help people. But he's described for the last, half an hour, how it can also be used to control the thinking of the population. And they've done an amazing job. I'm sure they spent a fortune setting up this system that entrains the minds of the American people.
That's right, Al. And I just also want to clarify that hypnosis by itself is not mind control, right? So hypnosis is one of the tools within the mind control bucket, if you will. So they'll use other ways in which to break down the mind-body dynamic in order to have people not think critically and to submit and so on. So as an example, the conditioning that you always get into is that you talk to your audience about the whole system of commerce and contracts. People are conditioned to believe that the system of commerce and contracts is actually a republic.
Yes.
It's the furthest thing from it, right?
Exactly.
There are, vaccines, also fluoride and GMOs and everything else that goes on. It's full spectrum dominance. Think of it that way, full spectrum dominance. So they have many, many ways in which they break down the mind and the body. And so that's why, they constantly have to work at it. The good news is that humans are extremely resilient, because if we weren't, they wouldn't be spending 24/7, 365 days a year forevermore, ensuring that they can keep us down.
Right.
And that's why when people do break out of the programming, they're out.
Yeah.
And the controllers have a very, very difficult time trying to pull these people back in. Many will never get pulled back in. So that's why they focus on young people, by the way. They want to shape the minds of the young people. So the indoctrination and the conditioning starts right away. It starts as soon as you leave the womb, because, as a baby, you're going to get vaccinated dozens of times by the time that you're, 5 or 6 years old. Then you're going to go to school, and our schools are not education. They're really indoctrination centers. And then, you're going to make your way through high school and then college and universities and all that stuff. And the problem is that people really don't understand the magnitude of the control that's in place. People don't like to believe that they're being controlled. They don't like to believe that they're puppet masters. But the reality of the situation is it's totally controlled.
Yes, and we've done a show on explaining to people why in 1933, during a national emergency, the American citizen, the United States citizens, were declared enemies of the state.
Right.
And as long as a national emergency is in place, that status is still there. People don't like to believe they were born into a country, told they were free, told they had the Bill of Rights to protect them, told they had a justice system, and when they discover the fact that, no, you were not born free, you were made an enemy of the state from birth forward. And I've tried to explain to them, freedom, okay, has nothing to do with having to buy a license to own a dog.
Or have a license to get married.
To get married, or cut hair, or fix plumbing. That has nothing to do with freedom. You have been made an enemy of the state, and that's why they require you as enemy be licensed or registered or certified to earn a living in their system. And people have a real hard time with that, Mike. Even though the evidence is everywhere, the regulations are overwhelmingly harsh. They control how you build. They control how you remodel. If you don't do it the way they say, they implement penalties, fines, and fees.
Taxes.
And taxes, you're taxed on every level. I mean, you buy gas, you're taxed. Your local community taxes, your state, the federal, everything. And if you get your telephone bill or your electric bill, look at all those charges on there, folks.
Right.
Okay, does that mean you're free? You're not free. You are an enemy of the state, and that's why they don't care if they give your child a dread disease with vaccines. They don't care.
No, they don't care. And here's the thing, right? We live and interact and exist in a feudal system. The feudal system never went away.
No.
But they don't call it the feudal system anymore. So what happens is you're born into the feudal system. You are born into enslavement.
Right.
You're not free, but they tell you you're free.
Right.
So you have defined freedom in the construct in which they operate. So you think that paying taxes is part of being free. That's we have to pay for roads. We have to do this. We have to do that. When in fact, there should be no federal income tax, because if the U.S. government printed its own money and had the Treasury do its job, you wouldn't have to borrow money from a private bank, which is the Federal Reserve, the central banking system. And if the government printed its own money, well, then there would be no need for federal income tax, because the government would owe the money to itself, right?
Correct.
The point I'm trying to make, folks, is that you're not free.
No.
As Al was saying, you have to have a license for everything. I mean, if you have a car, you have to have a license to drive your car. You have to have a registration. You have to have insurance. These are all terms that have to do with conducting commerce.
Right. Well, and as I've said many times on the show, and maybe I'll do a show in the near future, bringing back the notice of condition precedent, this system is not, it's based on a presumption that you're agreeing and consenting to all of these restrictions.
Right.
Even though they are not giving you the information, it's based on the premise that we're granting them informed consent. When that word, nothing could be further from the truth. We are not informed, period. When you go to the medical system, they do not inform you. They prescribe black box warning drugs. In fact, you get more truth about pharmacology products from the ads on TV than you will ever get from your doctor.
That's right. And you can't be informed if you're in a state of ignorance.
Correct.
The two don't come together. So there's a quote. It's attributed to Chris Hedges. I don't know if Chris Hedges actually said this, but it doesn't really matter because it's a great quote. It kind of summarizes everything we're talking about, Al. But the quote goes like this: "We now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the press destroys information, religions destroy morals, and our banks destroy the economy." That pretty much sums it up.
That does sum it up. It absolutely sums it up. And I'm going to bring it up again. I've said it many times on this show, and I know you're aware of it. But the lawyers, I spoke with a lawyer this past week, or actually for the last several weeks, delightful woman. I will have her on this show. She is not currently practicing law, however, but she's looking honestly at her own profession. And in 1933, they declared a state of emergency. Congress gave the president ultimate authority over the country. What we're saying is that they basically suspended normal quote, constitutional, unquote, processes during a national emergency. Unfortunately, they didn't grant this power to FDR. They granted it to the office of the president. So as long as there's justification for declaring an emergency or war, the president maintains this dictatorial power, which is how we have more than 600 federal agencies. 600. The Constitution absolutely does not authorize 600 agencies to be making law.
Right.
That means that law is coming from the executive branch that is not constitutional. Now, when I talked to this wonderful, darling attorney, I asked her, when you were in law school, were you taught about the permanent state of national emergency? And for people who are unaware what that is, you can go to my website, anticorruptionsociety.com, go to the tab that says Source Documents, click on that, then scroll down and read Senate Report 93549. This report was done in 1973 by a Senate committee, and what they did is they absolutely investigated in detail. Many, many people were involved as to what this state of emergency means. Essentially, they were looking to find a way to terminate it, and they did not succeed in finding a way to terminate it. They concluded the only one who can terminate it is the president of the country. Congress cannot do that because the authority was moved from them to the office of president. But they have to have an emergency every year, and it has to be renewed by the president. And it has been renewed on the war on terror since Bush. Last year in October, Trump just amended the executive order that Bush signed, bringing in the war on terror and state of emergency. And every year since then, they have all of these terrorist attacks, as you can see, even though they are nothing but drills, they justify renewing the permanent state of emergency every year because of the war on terror.
Right. And I believe that, if I'm not mistaken, the late James Traficant talked about this on the floor of the Congress back in the 1990s.
Yes.
Traficant brought it up, and he did a great speech.
Yes, and that's on our website, too. Thank you for bringing that up, Mike. It's on that same page, Source Document, and it's Congressional Report, and just scroll down 1993, and you will see what Traficant had to say.
They tried to ruin him, right? I mean, they tortured that poor man, and because he was speaking the truth, and he was talking about things that were not to be spoken about. So I guess the point I'm making, Al, is that if they ruined James Traficant's life, I mean, he was really tough as nails to him. He just really kept going.
Yeah.
They're certainly not going to allow lawyers to understand what they're really doing and what it is that they are really representing and defending or, whatever. It's just not going to be allowed. People have to remember, too, that lawyers, their oath is to the Bar Association.
That's correct.
Right. So the bar goes back to the crown.
Right.
So their allegiance is not even here to the Republic of the United States. It goes back to the British crown.
That's correct. And the Supreme Court of each state controls whether or not those lawyers are allowed to practice law.
That's right.
That is an unelected body, people. You have to understand that the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio or the state of North Carolina, this was not created by the legislature. This is a private enterprise. They make their own rules. And if that Supreme Court says, "Flooey on you, lawyer, you stepped over the line, we're going to take away your right to practice law, and we're going to cancel your bar card," there is nothing that people can do about that. And the lawyers understand that that would be the end of their ability to earn a living by practicing law.
Right, that's what they do. basically with just about everything, and when it comes down to really wanting to quiet somebody down without taking them out, is they will threaten their livelihood.
Yes.
Right? So lawyers and just politicians, if you think that you're going to wander off the reservation, well, they'll fix that. They'll make sure that you won't make a living.
Yes.
That's how they go about it. I mean, that's the tactic.
Well, and again, the only thing that I wish people would consider is the comprehension that all of these rules and restrictions, including that for lawyers and doctors, are written based on them being a dead legal fiction corporation. And that you can get more understanding on that if you go to anticorruptionsociety.com and click on the page that says Notice of Condition Precedent. There is a little booklet in there that I recommend people read to understand what happened in 33 and how is it that we seem to have no rights here today. And how can they make rules against a corporation when it comes to vaccines? People have to look at what's the definition of a person. Then you realize, well, a corporation can't even take a vaccine. Read that little book and you'll understand how they're playing this game. But how does hypnotherapy help the people who have really been victimized, the people who have been robbed or the people who've been beat up or worse? How does it give them relief? Because I'll tell you, they're pushing drugs right now, and I just don't see how. I did several shows on it. I don't see how these drugs trying to change the brain chemistry is going to give them happiness or relief or calm. I mean, how is it that hypnotherapy can do something and pharmacology, of course, can't?
Well, pharmacology is just looking to remap the brain. As an example, I mean, if you have a lot of stress and anxiety, I mean, they'll take a Valium.
Right.
But the thing is, you become reliant on the drugs in order to cope. And coping is something that all humans have to learn to do. Right? It's part of life. I mean, even having levels of stress in your life, not being overstressed, but stress and coping. I mean, these are things that we have to learn to do because that's the way life is. And what the pharmaceutical companies and the medical industry, they're coming out and saying, well, I mean, you really shouldn't have to develop coping abilities. I mean, you should just take a pill. Don't have any stress in your life. I mean, I love it when I go to the doctor and they say, do you have stress? as if like you're some kind of oddball if you have stress. And then if you say, well, yeah, I have some stress in my life. I mean, I have a job and all this stuff. And then they go down this path, well, you really have to try to get the stress down and manage the stress and so on. And, well, how do I do that, doctor? Well, here, let me write a prescription for you.
Yes. Okay, hold on. We're going to break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Talking to Mike Williams. We do have a caller, and I am going to invite people to call in. The call-in number is 1-800-313-9443. But before we get started on calls, I wanted Mike to share with us how hypnotherapy actually can help in this mess.
Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, Al, the mind, think of the mind as like within it there's a hard drive. So what hypnosis does is hypnosis will go back and take a look at those files. So I'm using the file analogy because most people will understand it. And to make the inner mind or the subconscious mind aware that we want to make a change, that we want to be able to update those files so that the behavior going forward is different, that it's the desired behavior versus the old behavior. So when a client goes into hypnosis and we go back to when those files first got written to the hard drive, when the first event took place, we call it the initial sensitizing event. When those files are first written to the drive, we can then start from that point and go forward by having the client understand the situation that led to the files being written, as an example, like trauma as an example, and understanding that there's a different and better way to move forward, that those files are old and we don't need to use them anymore. If you don't update the files, what will happen is the subconscious mind will continue to send those files to the conscious mind over and over and over again without updating them. And that's why many times people do not understand why they behave a certain way or why they react a certain way. It's because these old files are being used and they are unaware of anything about these old files. And many times it's just suppressed memories, as an example. So if I ask somebody when they come in and I'll say, well, when did you first experience this behavior? They'll say, well, I think it was going back, and they'll pick a date. Virtually every time that I take them back in time, I regress them back into hypnosis to understand when those files first got written. It's always at a date that's earlier, always, which means that the earlier memory is not being recognized by the conscious mind. By getting the client to understand that they want to move forward in a different way and having them understand what it means to continue to two things. One is, what does it mean for your life if you continue to do the things that you're doing? Let's just say smoking as an example. Well, eventually it's going to result in very, very bad health problems. And then take a look at your life and say, well, what does your life look like if you don't smoke? What happens when you stop smoking? Then they're going to see that their life is going to be a lot better. They're going to be a lot healthier. They're going to live longer, and so on. Once the inner mind, the subconscious mind, becomes aware that, hey, if I change these files, there's a big benefit. I'm not going to have that cough anymore. I'm not going to be a social outcast. I'm just going to be healthier. My family's going to be happier. The mind is very good at starting the process of making that change. Very, very good at it.
Oh, that is so encouraging. Thank you.
Well, this is what a lot of people don't understand. They think it's hard. Well, if you find yourself a good hypnotherapist who is really skilled at their craft, really good at what they do, they'll be able to make those changes. And I have a lot of clients. They've seen huge benefits.
Wonderful. That's great. Okay. We have someone from Texas, Bill in Austin. Bill, are you there?
Good evening. Yes, I'm the same guy that continuously calls saying that it seems like the whole country is hypnotized.
And it is.
Yes, my contention that it's I agree 100% with your guest, Mike. It seems like the country's already hypnotized. We just have to dehypnotize them, actually.
No, that's exactly right. They are conditioned, and it's through a perpetual motion machine of conditioning that takes place through the television set, the media mostly, but also, as I mentioned earlier with Al, through breaking down the mind-body dynamic. So there's a lot of other things at play, but the television set and movies are also fall into the category of programming, have a huge effect on the public.
What is your suggestion to the average person on how to counteract this? It looks like a massive propaganda system we have going now.
Okay, we'll hold that answer to that question when we come back from the break.
Well, I mean, with your caller, the first thing you've got to do is you have to be not afraid to question things.
Right.
That's number one. What happens is part of the programming, too, is to make you an outcast if you do question things.
Yeah.
They want to marginalize you. So you have to push past that. It's very difficult in the beginning. Everybody's gone through it.
Yeah.
Myself, too. Nobody wants to be called a tinfoil hat wearer or.
Well, even when you're challenging your physician saying, I'd like to try an alternative.
Yeah.
You don't really want to close that door. God knows you could break a leg. But at the same time, you want to assert yourself in a way that doesn't make you enemy number one. And you have to think about how to do that. It took me a long time to write a letter explaining why I was no longer going to take their medication, but I left the door open in case.
I have two doctors. I have a Western medicine doctor, and then I have a natural medicine doctor.
Yeah.
So I go to the Western medicine doctor, and I hear his, gibberish, and then I can go to my natural medicine doctor, and he will present the alternatives to me.
That's correct. And the Western guy is the guy who can do the ultrasound to see if you really have a blood clot. he's the guy who can take the X-ray to see if the rib is broken.
Right.
So
That's exactly right.
I have to do both, navigate both.
Well, that's the thing. It's not binary. Really, the perfect world would be that there is a merging, right? An honest, genuine merging of the two. But that's never going to happen because Western medicine is a racket.
It is. And it's designed to make you sick and kill you.
Yep, exactly.
I figured that one out. But at the same time, we still have to navigate them. You never know when you end up in one of their ERs.
Right.
Okay. Could you repeat your question, Bill? I think the listeners, I want to make sure we got it right.
Well, just the question is, most people don't understand this. I mean, I've probably taken the same courses that you have, like the Gil Boying with instantaneous hypnosis and a lot of the things that you've learned. But what is your suggestion to the average person that's not familiar with this? What is your suggestion to what they could do to stop interfering with their critical thinking as far as the world goes?
Well, it's not an easy thing because everybody's at a different rate and pace. So we're not going to have like it's the light switch on, the light switch off, right? But my recommendation, first of all, is to not be afraid to question things. There are a lot of people that do question things or things don't seem right, but they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to say something because, I might be ridiculed for saying something that somebody else is going to say, well, that's not what the official story is, and that's not what everybody else believes. Why would you say that? Are you crazy or something? So everybody has to push through that. I had to push through that years ago. Nobody wants to be ridiculed and called names and called a conspiracy quote-unquote theorist or a tinfoil hat wearer. The other thing, too, is the biggest thing, as I mentioned earlier in the show, is turn that television set off. Just turn it off because there is nothing coming out of that television set that is truthful. It's the Ministry of Propaganda. 6 corporations own all of the media in the United States. And I think in Australia it's 2. So it's not very hard for them to be able to shape their message and to figure out who hears what. All it takes is for 6 people to sit down and decide what it is you're going to hear and what it is you're not going to hear, what it is you're going to see and what it is you're not going to see. So those are my recommendations, first of all, is basically step up to the plate. Don't be afraid to question things. That's why you have a brain. That's why we have our mind, to do those things. And push through the fear and start turning things off. That's the best way I think that I found, at least for me, that I was able to do it.
Okay. That's good advice.
That sounds great. One thing that I've learned that helped me the most was to study hypnosis itself. And the more ways that I've learned that people become somnambulistic and just completely into an alpha theta level was the different ways that you are hypnotized. And once you know the ways that you have become hypnotized, then you start to see it around you more.
Right, that's right. But the first thing is they have to know that they're being hypnotized. So that's why we do shows like this where there's an awareness now when people look at their television sets, if they're listening to this, they're going to say, I remember Mike and Al talking about this. Let me take a look and see if I see that too. And then all of a sudden the light bulb's going to go off and they're going to go, yes, indeed, that is happening, right? So the first step is to get people to understand what's really going on.
He has a website. Give him your website, Mike.
My hub website is sageofquay.com. So SAGE, Sage of OFQUAY, sageofquay.com. If you go there, that's my hub website. You can find links to everything that I'm involved in.
Yeah.
And do you have an organization or any group of people that you work with, or do people just sign up to your website? It's
just me. I run solo. So, yeah, there's no organization. It's just Mike sitting here grinding it out, trying to wake people up.
Okay, great.
Well, we've come to the end of the program. I believe, Ken, that he's kind of let us drift over. He does that when he really likes what's going on and he thinks he doesn't want to break in. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate this, and I will have you on again. I know there's a bunch of other topics that we could cover, and you just really helped enlighten people about this whole false flag thing and the mind games they're playing on the public.
Yeah, I hope so, because we could talk about this for a long time, scratching the surface. But if it gets some people to nudge them a little bit, to wake them up, that's a good thing.
Yes, absolutely.